The shocking murder of Dr. Thomas Meixner. How one bad grade turned into a nightmare. Hook asterisk. What if one bad grade could set off a chain of terrifying events you could never escape? Asterisk. When Dr. Thomas Meixner is murdered, his TA Emily finds herself trapped in a nightmare with no way out. But the real horror isn't just the killer, it's the chilling game that's just beginning. Asterisk. Stay with us, because what happens next will make you question what's real, and what's just the beginning of something much worse. Asterisk. Don't blink. Don't look away. The truth will shock you. Asterisk. Watch till the end, because the nightmare doesn't end where you think it does. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it an unsettling chill. The streetlights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked pavement. Dr. Thomas Meixner paced the hallway of the university building, his footsteps echoing in the silence. His mind raced with thoughts of the grade that had haunted him all week. One single, disappointing mark. He had been meticulous. His work had been flawless. So why had he been punished like this? The door to his office creaked open. He hadn't noticed the figure standing in the shadows. A man. Tall. Unfamiliar. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. Something wasn't right. The man stepped forward, his face hidden in the darkness. Dr. Meixner? His voice was soft, almost too soft. Thomas nodded slowly, sensing the weight of the air shift. You didn't deserve that grade. The man continued, his words slow, deliberate. Thomas froze. The man's words sank into him, a deep, unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. Who are you? Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man took another step forward, the creak of his shoes the only sound breaking the stillness. You don't remember me? The voice was familiar. Too familiar. A memory flickered, sharp and fleeting. The man's eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. It hit him. The name. The face. A former student. A failure. One who had flunked his course years ago. The memories came rushing back, sudden and violent. He had been angry, violent even. But why was he back now? The man smiled, but it wasn't a smile. It was something darker. Something deadly. I've been waiting for this moment, the man said, his voice colder now. Thomas took a step back. His fingers grazed the edge of his desk. He had no time to think. Only time to react. The man lunged forward, faster than Thomas could see. A flash of silver. A sharp pain. Thomas gasped. The world tilted. The darkness swallowed him whole. The last thing he saw was the man's twisted grin. And then, nothing. The campus was eerily quiet. A few students wandered in the distance, unaware of the horror unfolding just inside the building. The clock tower struck midnight, its chimes reverberating through the empty courtyard. No one saw the shadow that slipped through the hallway, moving swiftly, purposefully. The man was gone. But his presence lingered in the air. It wasn't over yet. Back in the office, the body of Dr. Meixner lay still, the life drained from him. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint sound of dripping blood. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Heavy. Measured. Someone was coming. A young woman, Dr. Meixner's teaching assistant, entered the building. Her name was Emily. She'd stayed late in the library, working on a research project. The soft glow of her phone lit up her face as she made her way through the darkened halls. She had a strange feeling, a nagging sense that something wasn't right. She paused outside his office, sensing a shift in the air. Her pulse quickened. Something was wrong. She pushed the door open slowly. The faint scent of blood reached her nostrils. The sight that met her eyes made her stomach turn. Dr. Meixner was sprawled on the floor, his face pale, his eyes wide open. She froze. Fear clamped down on her chest. Her throat went dry. Dr. Meixner? She whispered, stepping into the room, her voice shaking. No answer. She edged closer, her heart hammering in her chest. The blood. The unnatural stillness. A cold wave washed over her. Then she saw it. The faintest of movements, just a twitch of his hand. Her breath caught in her throat. Was he still alive? No. It was impossible. But maybe there was hope? She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she reached for his wrist, feeling for a pulse. Nothing. Her body went numb. It couldn't be real. Then, her phone buzzed. She looked down, startled. A text. From an unknown number. The message was short, chilling. Asterisk. It's not over. Asterisk. Her eyes widened. Panic surged through her veins. She looked back at Dr. Meixner's lifeless body. And then she heard it. A faint creak from behind her. The door was closing. Slowly. Too slowly. Someone was in the hallway. The same someone who had left the bloodstains. The same someone who had whispered to Thomas. Her blood ran cold. And she knew then, her nightmare had just begun. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound so small yet so menacing. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the dark hallway, heart pounding in her chest. Nothing. The silence felt alive, pressing against her skin, suffocating her. Her phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. This time, the message was longer. Asterisk. I see you, Emily. I know what you're thinking. But it's too late for him. It's too late for you too. Asterisk. Her hands shook violently as she read the words. Her mind raced. Who was this? What did they want? She felt the cold sting of fear crawl up her spine. She turned back to the body of Dr. Meixner. The scene felt wrong. Too wrong. It wasn't just murder. It was a message. But a message for who? Her eyes fell on the desk. The papers scattered across the floor, the empty coffee cup overturned. And then she saw it. A small, folded note on the desk, its corner sticking out as if it had been deliberately placed there. Her hands were ice as she reached for it. Unfolding it, her eyes quickly scanned the handwriting. Asterisk. You failed me too, Emily. And now you will pay. You cannot escape. Asterisk. A chill ran through her veins, the words sinking deep into her bones. Her pulse raced, her thoughts swirling. What had she missed? What had she done wrong? The sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Emily's heart dropped into her stomach. She had to leave. She grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she tried to dial 911. But the screen went black. Her stomach churned. She had no choice now. With trembling hands, she slid the phone into her pocket. She had to get out. There was a back exit at the end of the hall, she remembered. She turned on her heel, moving as fast as her legs would carry her. Her footsteps were too loud. The walls seemed to close in around her. Every corner held a threat, every shadow could be hiding him. The door to the stairwell was just ahead. She was almost there. Almost free. But then... a hand? Grabbing her wrist. She screamed, her voice echoing through the empty building. She was pulled back into the darkness. The world went black. Again. No escape. Not yet. Her body slammed into the cold wall, the air knocked out of her lungs. She gasped, panic surging as she tried to twist free. But the grip was unrelenting, like iron. Her mind screamed for her to move, to fight back, but her limbs felt heavy. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. Sure, a voice whispered into her ear, low and dangerous. The familiar voice. The same voice from before. She froze. The man. You shouldn't have come here, he said softly, his breath warm against her skin. Her heart raced in her chest. She fought to break free, but his grip tightened. Her thoughts scrambled. There was no way out. The door behind her was locked, and she had no time to reach the exit now. Every inch of her screamed to get away, but the man's voice had a strange calmness to it. I gave you a chance, he murmured. The words didn't make sense. Emily's mind raced to piece together the fragments. A chance? She was just a teaching assistant. She didn't deserve this. Her eyes darted toward the exit, her only chance at survival. But his hand was tightening, pulling her further into the shadows. You should have known better, the man hissed. And then, everything went still. The seconds dragged on like hours. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. Suddenly, the man released his grip. He didn't push her to the ground. He didn't strike her. Instead, he took a step back. Emily staggered, her knees buckling under the weight of the moment. She struggled to catch her breath. Her eyes locked onto his. They were cold. Empty. You know, he said, almost conversationally. I wasn't supposed to get this far. Emily blinked, her mind still scrambling to understand. Was he admitting something? Was he losing control? His lips curled into a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I was supposed to end it with Meixner, he whispered. But now you're involved. And that changes everything. The words hit her like a ton of bricks. Her stomach twisted in horror. She realized the awful truth. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about Dr. Meixner. It was about her. She could feel the weight of the situation sinking in. There was no escape. Not now. The man was closer again, his cold fingers brushing her cheek. Don't worry, Emily. This will be over soon. A shiver ran down her spine. Before she could react, he stepped back again, disappearing into the shadows. Her vision blurred. Her breath came faster. Where had he gone? Emily didn't wait for an answer. She scrambled to her feet, her mind focused only on survival. The stairwell was still there. The door was still locked. But she could break it down. She could. Then a sound. The softest, most delicate noise. A voice. Asterisk. You can run, but you can't hide. Asterisk. The words dripped with malice, echoing in the empty halls. She froze again. Had he never really left? The air felt colder. Emily's skin prickled, a chill seeping into her bones. Her heart hammered in her chest, faster than it ever had before. The voice had come from behind her. But there was no one there. She spun around, eyes wide, breath shallow. The hallway stretched out before her, empty, silent. Had it been a trick? A figment of her overactive mind? No. There was something, someone, here. The faintest of whispers curled around her ears again. Asterisk. You're not alone. Asterisk. The words were so close, so real. She could almost feel the heat of the breath on her neck. Her entire body tensed. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet refused to move. Everything felt wrong. A sharp noise cut through the silence. The scrape of metal. It came from behind her. She didn't need to turn around. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up. She bolted. The door to the stairwell was only a few feet away now. She reached for the handle, her fingers brushing it, her pulse quickening. And then, a loud crash. The unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting the floor behind her. Her breath caught. She yanked the door open with every ounce of strength left in her. But it wouldn't budge. Why wouldn't it open? She pulled harder. No. It was locked. She twisted the knob in desperation, her hands slick with sweat. Nothing. A low chuckle echoed from the shadows. It was him. He was toying with her. She could feel it in every fiber of her being. Her eyes shot to the hallway. Still no sign of him. But she knew he was close. She could hear his breathing now, slow and deliberate. Like he was savoring the moment. Emily pressed her back against the door, her breath shallow, trying to think. Her mind raced, searching for any way out. She scanned the room frantically. The windows? No. She was on the ground floor, but there were bars on them. She had no choice. She had to keep moving. She turned to face the hall again, each step feeling like it was echoing in the emptiness. Emily! The voice again. It wasn't just a whisper. It was a command. A warning. She froze. It's over. The words played in her head, her mind finally catching up to the truth. She was trapped. Every exit closed. Every move controlled. A cold sweat drenched her skin. She turned down the hallway. Her hands shook, the cold creeping in. No footsteps followed her. Only silence. But she could feel him there. Watching. Waiting. You can run, the voice said again, asterisk. But you'll never outrun your fate. Asterisk. The floor beneath her creaked. A door in the distance, slightly ajar. It beckoned her. The last chance. But was it? Would it be her salvation or her final mistake? Emily swallowed hard, every nerve in her body screaming to turn back, but she didn't. She stepped forward. And the door slammed shut behind her. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the narrow hallway, a deafening finality to it. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She whipped around. But there was nothing. Nothing but the darkness that had swallowed her whole. Her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't tell if she was imagining it, but the air felt thick now, suffocating, as though the room itself was closing in. The door behind her was locked. The cold crept further into her bones, each exhale like a puff of smoke in the frozen air. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She had to move. But where? The hallway stretched before her, longer than it had seemed moments ago, and there, just ahead, the door. It beckoned her like an illusion. The cold steel handle gleamed faintly in the dim light. It was the only way out. Her legs moved before she could think, desperate, shaking. The room seemed to grow darker with every step she took, the shadows pressing in from all sides. She reached the door and grasped the handle. Click. It was open. She pushed it wide, her breath catching as she stepped into the room beyond. A small office, dimly lit by a single desk lamp, its light casting a soft glow over the papers scattered across the desk. It looked normal. Too normal. For a moment, Emily stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. It was just an office, nothing like the horrors she had been through just moments before. The stillness, the quiet, it felt wrong. Then a noise. A scraping sound from behind her. She spun around, her heart racing again. The door. It was slowly closing. The same slow, deliberate movement that had made her feel so trapped earlier. It was happening again. Her pulse spiked. She was running out of time. A faint, sickly smile appeared on her face as she realized the truth. She wasn't alone. The man was here. He was always here. It was his game, his trap. And she had just walked straight into it. Her hand shot toward the window. Locked. Her eyes darted to the desk. A small drawer caught her attention. Could it be? Her fingers trembled as she yanked it open. Inside, there was nothing but a single sheet of paper. Nothing more. But the paper was covered in red ink, blood red. It read simply. Asterisk. I warned you. Asterisk. Her stomach turned, nausea flooding her senses. The door creaked again. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. He was coming. The door was almost shut now. Her breath hitched. She could hear him. So close. A figure appeared in the dim light. A shadow. Tall. Unmistakable. The man. But he wasn't alone. A second figure moved in the doorway, blocking her escape. Two of them now. Her blood turned to ice. One of the figures stepped into the light. It was him. The man from before. But there was something different. Something more dangerous. More twisted. The other figure was still in shadow, but Emily knew. She knew it was him. The one who had murdered Dr. Meixner. The one who had come for her. A scream caught in her throat, but it never came. The door was closed now. And in that moment, Emily realized one terrible truth. She had never had a chance. It was never about surviving. It was about knowing that there was no escape. The room felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around Emily, each breath a struggle, every beat of her heart echoing in her ears. The man in the doorway smiled at her, his lips curling into something unnatural, something grotesque. She wanted to scream, to run. But her body felt frozen, as if every muscle had locked up in fear. The second figure, the one standing in the shadows, didn't move, but its presence was overwhelming. It was like a dark storm, waiting to strike. "You thought you could escape," the man in the doorway said, his voice calm, almost amused. "You really thought you could survive this. But you were wrong, Emily." Her mind raced, trying to find some way out, but it was pointless. There was nowhere to run. The door behind her was already shut, and the window was locked. There was no escape. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, cold, piercing. "You're just like Meixner," the man continued, his eyes narrowing. "Always thinking you're in control. But you're not. None of us ever were." His words rattled her. It was clear now, this was never just about a grade. It was never about revenge for a single failure. It was about something darker. Something deeper. Emily's thoughts began to race, her breath shallow. She wasn't just a victim. She was part of this twisted game. Part of the plan. The shadowy figure stepped forward, emerging into the dim light. It was him, the former student, the one who had failed Dr. Meixner's course years ago. But something was off. He was different now. Darker. His eyes had no emotion, no remorse. "Do you know what the worst part of all of this is?" he said, his voice cold and distant. Emily felt a chill run through her. "The worst part," he continued, "is that you never even saw it coming." He took a step toward her. The darkness in the room grew thicker. And Emily realized then, in that final moment, that there was no redemption. No mercy. This had always been the end. A sickening grin spread across his face. The last thing Emily saw before the darkness swallowed her whole was his eyes, empty, lifeless, and the gleam of a knife, reflecting the dim light. And then, nothing. The darkness enveloped her. It was as though the world had ceased to exist. The silence was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. Emily's body felt weightless, as if she were floating in the void. Her mind, too, seemed to slip away from her, her thoughts unraveling like threads pulled loose. The warmth of her breath, the thrum of her pulse, all of it faded. Everything was still. For a moment, she thought she might be dead. But then, she heard something. A distant sound. A voice. Faint at first. Almost too soft to hear. Emily. Her name. It echoed through the void. A cold shiver crawled up her spine. Was it him? Was he still watching her? Still waiting? But the voice wasn't quite the same. It was gentle, calm, almost like a whisper of reassurance. "Emily!" The voice came again. She tried to respond, but her body was heavy, immobilized. Slowly, her senses returned. The feeling of her limbs, the sensation of her breathing, the weight of her own existence. It was as if she had been ripped from the depths of that suffocating darkness, pulled back into the world. Her eyes opened. She was no longer in the cold, empty hallway. The familiar surroundings of her apartment greeted her, her desk, her books, the soft light from the street lamp outside. She gasped, her chest rising and falling rapidly. It was a dream. No, it couldn't have been. It had felt too real. Too vivid. The blood. The fear. The man. Her pulse quickened, her eyes darting around the room. Was she safe? The room was quiet now, peaceful even. Yet the echo of that voice, the voice that had whispered her name, lingered in her mind. Was it real? Her phone buzzed, the sound sharp and jarring. A new message. From an unknown number. Asterisk. "You can't escape your fate, Emily. I'll be waiting." Asterisk. The screen went black before she could read more. Her breath caught in her throat. The room felt colder, the shadows in the corners a little darker than they should have been. And then she knew. It wasn't over. It had never been over. She wasn't free. Not yet. Not ever. The darkness was still out there. Waiting. Always waiting. And this time, there was no escape.